One of our missiles very purposely struck Chaklala. It's almost a millennial revelation that the Pakistanis could do it. They reveled in it until Sindoor. There was no retaliation from the Indian side. Then shouldn't you have gone in with waves of aircraft bearing bombs and dropping them to take off the entire Balatot hilltop if you trigger a terrorist incident at India? We are going to respond by diminishing your territory in POK. It cannot go back to having your separate flag and this, that, and the other. No, yeah. But what can we do? Please tell us.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we take a multi-dimension view of something important that has happened. The last fortnight, or maybe a few more days than that, have not been most easiest of periods as far as Indian history is concerned. This has also not been the entire Indian subcontinent, has also not been a very tranquil region. It has not been very pleasant to be living in here at this particular time. I kind of got reminded of the events in 2001 and 2002 after the attack on Indian Parliament, when the Western nations pulled out large number of the diplomats and termed the Indian subcontinent as the most dangerous place in the world. Well, this time they didn't actually put such labels, but yes, other frightening messages and statements have been made. We will be talking about what really happened after the Pahalgam terrorist attacks, and I will be talking about it with one of the most eminent thinkers, strategic affairs expert on the subject, and even somebody who's actually kept a look on the world of diplomacy, Bharat Karnad. Bharat Karnad is a distinguished fellow at the United Service Institution of India. He's also an emeritus professor for National Security Studies at the Center for Policy Research. Importantly, he's also written a book several years ago titled very significantly Staggering Forward, Narendra Modi and India's Global Ambition. This book came out a while ago in 2018, but nonetheless, it is still very important. Welcome to the program, Bharat. It's really a pleasure to speak with you, and we will try to get some more understanding on this phase of India, which is definitely going to be looked at in various dimensions at the moment also, and also several years later by the historians of future. Let us begin with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first address to the nation, to the people. He spoke on television where he made several statements. The most important, which has been used as a headline point by several newspapers, is that we shall not succumb to the nuclear blackmail of Pakistan. Now, this statement was made just a few minutes after the American President Donald Trump said that, a nuclear war has been averted between India and Pakistan. I would like you to take us straight into the points which were made by Mr. Modi in his speech to the people, and how do you assess each of these points which is made?
Well, look, I think you started with the nuclear aspect, and that's because I think Trump, in a sense, with his usual hyperbole, in a sense, overstated the entire situation. And he talked about India and Pakistan being on the verge of whatever he thought was a nuclear confrontation, which is simply not the case. I mean, in fact, this particular crisis, neither country went on a nuclear alert. I mean, you're almost in any crisis, you get up to the first stage of alert. We are always there, but not to the next stage, which is where things get serious. So this did not happen. And despite all the usual saber rattling that Pakistan does, India did not rise to the bait, as it were, rhetorical bait or first use and whatever it is that the Pakistanis were talking about, not directly, but
Okay.
by hints and allusions by commentators and government officials, etc. So this was, as I said, completely overstated. Things never came to that pass. What the metrics that the Prime Minister laid down yesterday, the four of them, was the most important was what you just mentioned, and that has been the newspaper headline, which is that we would not succumb to nuclear blackmail, which is correct. Because I think for too long, the Pakistanis have believed that they have space to intimidate India with conventional, these kind of terrorist incidents, wherein whenever India reacts, they then threaten nuclear weapon use. And their belief is that this somehow deters India from pushing the conventional military envelope because it has conventional military superiority. So I think when the Prime Minister said this, and the fact that we struck one of our missiles very purposely struck Chaklala, which is the base for the Strategic Plans Division, which is the nuclear secretariat for the Pakistani state, is based in Chaklala, underground, of course. But the fact that you struck it was a very symbolically important moment, because it said that we really don't take your blackmail threat seriously. So what the Prime Minister said had earlier been manifested in the strike that was organized against Chaklala. So the Pakistanis, I think, have got the message that, well, that old trick of theirs is of bringing on the nuclear bogey simply won't work anymore. The other things that the Prime Minister has said are the usual stuff, that we will respond to terrorism by going across, not just across the LOC, but as
Also into Pakistan territory.
Yes, into Pakistan proper, which is that that is no more a no-go zone for Indian military options. So, and which are the other two? Whatever
Also,
my
you said that India is no longer going to distinguish between terrorist organizations and government setup. That is something very important.
That's right.
That,
And the fourth one?
using the Pakistan state and terrorists as some kind of synonyms.
That's right. But they are synonymous, aren't they? Because the terrorism instrument of terrorism is a very it has been chosen with great care and great deliberation, because Pakistan sees it as an asymmetric means of warfare. Asymmetric because in a symmetric conventional military sphere, they cannot match India. We are almost, 7 times the Air Force. The Air Force is 7 times larger. The Army is twice as big and a bit more, actually, and so on and so forth. So they cannot, and Navy, they are completely out of the picture, honestly. India can dominate the Pakistani Navy maritime-wise any which way. So they have necessarily to resort to terrorism and asymmetric means, which until now they've done successfully. Let's be very clear about it. And that is our fault. Our fault, because before Sindoor, our concern was merely with, okay, they have done this, we'll restrict our action-reaction sequences to POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and so on and so forth. If that, in fact, we had an attack on Parliament, the symbol of Indian sovereignty, and India did not react. In 2000, that was in 2000, the year 2000.
2001.
Sorry, it's almost a millennial revelation that the Pakistanis could do it. They reveled in it. In 2008, they carried out an even a less heinous, but symbolically, more heinous in terms of manpower
Number of
losses,
casualties, number of people who died.
yeah, in terms of the losses in Mumbai
Yeah.
and so on. But
And also the duration for which the
yes,
terrorist operation continued.
continued for almost 2 to 3 days, almost
Yes,
as long as the Sindoor operation.
yes,
And that they could mastermind it, that they could sustain such an operation, was an eye opener for many of us. Because if a Pakistani state has the links and the stamina and the wherewithal to carry out such an attack from a seaborne side, it was a seaborne attack,
that's right.
then obviously the ISI had built up that capability to an extraordinary extent. And the fact of it, of course, was, as I wrote at that time, had Pakistan wished to do a Pearl Harbor, they could have done it. Because instead of going to the Taj Hotel side, they could have just gone to the Lions Gate side, and an awful lot of our fleet, Indian fleet, was at anchorage. So, had the Pakistanis wanted, they could have blown up much of the fleet. I said then, the reason perhaps was they understood that that would have meant a war of annihilation, that they couldn't have survived. Because, as I've argued in my books, the wars that India and Pakistan fight are fairly innocuous affairs. They in fact, fit the description that the great Major General Palit, perhaps the finest scholar soldier the Indian military has ever produced, Major General D.K. Monty Palit, who described India-Pakistan wars as communal riots with tanks, which is a very, very apt description of the so-called wars which I don't take seriously for the reasons of the description that Palit very aptly has in his, that he has put across, which is because, I remember asking General Palit, were you merely being facile when you made
Mhm.
when you described it this way? And he pulled himself to full height, a 6-footer, and he says, "Mr. Karnad, I'm never facile." So I said, "Very well, General, then I'll take it seriously." And what I did was I used the riot template for the India-Pakistan wars, and lo and behold, they fit the riot metrics completely. All
Okay,
India-Pakistan wars, which is what? What is a riot? A communal riot. It is localized.
that's right.
It's geographically constrained, limited. That is the space-wise limited. It is time-wise limited. No India-Pakistan so-called war has lasted more than 13 days. Even the 1971 war ended
Yeah.
actually on the
Yes.
10th day, but we waited for 2 more days for Jagjit Singh Arora to come into Dhaka, fly into Dhaka to formally take the
For the
surrender of General
surrender
Yad.
ceremony. Yeah.
Yeah, so we finished that operation in 10 days. Most of our other things have lasted 8 to 10 days, 12 days at most. I mean, what are we talking about? This is not serious.
You said that most of India-Pakistan warfare have been innocuous. What about this particular phase that we just saw? Would you say that this was not really warfare that way,
It's
but
not
yes,
warfare.
it definitely was some kind of a military exchange, conflict, whichever word one wants to choose. So was it
No,
also innocuous?
no. What I meant was the reaction and then the action reaction that follows the Indian reaction is
Yes.
what is in the military sense what I was talking about.
Yes,
The
of course.
provocation is a terrorist provocation, which can
That's
be
right.
dastardly. You had attack on Parliament. You had hundreds killed in Mumbai at the VT terminus, in the
Yes.
Taj Hotel, and so on and so forth.
Another
Yes,
location.
but that is a provocation. You're talking about a provocation, and then the Indian reaction or
Reaction.
response, assuming there is any, and then what happens thereafter, meaning how does Pakistan respond to our reaction? So the trouble was that until Sindoor, there was no retaliation from the Indian side. There was no
But there
retaliation.
had been in 2016 and 2019 19 to Uri and
Yeah,
to
yeah,
Pulwama. But
you
the
know,
results were really questionable. What the government of
yes,
India put out did not really very convincing, and then eventually it turned out to be that they were not really, no, did not really achieve any objective.
precisely. Why? Because again, this is our problem with our military, if I may say so. The Indian military never prepares for these kinds of contingencies. And when, for instance, after the attack on Parliament, and let me make this public because I've written about it, I've said it to military audiences that I've addressed. So now let me put it across to you. The very next day, or perhaps the same evening or whatever, Bajpayee ji called a meeting, a cabinet meeting or the CCS or whatever,
Mhm.
and the cabinet committee on security meeting. And
Yes.
General Padmanabhan, who was then the army chief, was called. And Vajpayee asked him in his usual, way. He asked him, General Sahab, आप कुछ कर सकते हैं? You can imagine
Hmm.
Vajpayee asking Padmanabhan, the army chief, this in this
Hmm.
manner. He said, आप कुछ कर सकते हैं? And what do you think General Padmanabhan responded? Do you know how he responded?
I don't know. I would like keen to hear
Yeah,
from you.
he responded by shaking his head, saying nothing. He shook his
No.
head. And so when I address my military audiences, what I say is, how was it minuted? How was General Padmanabhan's reaction minuted, for God's sake? If you're going to shake your head, then there's a problem. Because Vajpayee understood कि इनकी बस की बात नहीं है. There's going to be no reaction, immediate reaction, because the military is not prepared for it. Then what was the option? Having tolerated, do you tolerate an attack on the symbol of your sovereignty? Something had to be done.
So that's
Vajpayee
why
then,
Operation Parakram.
yes, but that was a greater disaster, because if you're merely going to, what did the government announce? Very next 2 days, they said they're going to general mobilization for war. Now this is very serious. The Indian government announced a general mobilization for war. And so the entire country revved up, the military revved up, everything got started in the hope that something is going to happen. For
But nothing happened.
8 or 9 months, they were eyeballing
Yes.
each other, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. In fact, the losses from doing nothing were enormous for the Indian army. There was wear and tear for the Indian armored forces getting there. There was wear and tear on people. The whole kinds of, there were losses that were incurred by India by doing nothing. So this is a record. So Balakot, for instance, that is the big thing that the government
Happened
ballyhoos,
during this government.
in the Indian government ballyhoos and the Indian Air Force rates as a great success. This was 2019, if you recall.
Yes.
The point at that time I made right away was, and I remember meeting with the air chief in his office in Vayu Bhavan with his principal staff officers at that time. And I said, why did you choose the weapon that you chose? If the idea was to send across a political message, a message that could not have been misinterpreted, then
Yes.
shouldn't you have gone in with waves of aircraft bearing bombs and dropping them to take off the entire Balakot hilltop? Not make a small hole, if that's what you're trying to do with a precision guided munition, which it turned out was not the case. They missed the target entirely. The Pakistanis were
Interesting.
entirely correct in saying they missed the target because there was a targeting error. Because the Spice 2000 is basically a strap-on guidance system on a dumb bomb. What it does is
Okay.
it takes its bearings from the GPS. So if you may have your longitude and latitude right, but you don't have the altitude right, it overshot the target. And it actually took off a few trees, as the Pakistanis charged and alleged. That is absolutely correct. By
Compared
now,
to
it's
compared to that, how would you look at this particular entire the operation in its entirety?
this was a much more successful, much more effective military operation in the military sense. That is, firstly, your missiles hit the targets they were
Okay.
intended to hit, meaning they penetrated the Pakistani air defense systems, the air defense cover that the Pakistanis had put up. But and in also in defensive mode, our tiered air defense, layered air defense worked
Mhm.
beautifully with short range air defense systems, medium range air defense systems, long range air defense systems working in sync, radars picking up incoming ordnance, incoming platforms, and so on. So we did a damn good job, damn
Okay.
good job, I must say. So, and then you had in reserve, and we didn't use it, by the way, maybe once or twice or maybe the real hard S400 Smash system we didn't use because there was no need to. It was there as a backstop in case the Pakistanis went ballistic in a big way. By and large, I think it was misinterpreted by some newspapers who said, "Our the S400 is a big drone killer." Are Baba, you don't kill drones with S400. It becomes
Right.
too costly. S400
Exactly.
is a costly equipment.
Costly affair.
They don't use that to kill drones. Drones can be killed in hundreds of different other ways, which is what we did. So that's the short layered kind of the shortest tier in the air defense that worked very well, and we were able to, by and large, ward off the threat from the incoming Pakistani missiles and drones, etc. So these two were good things to have happened, very good things to have happened. But the point is, did it send the message? The same problem still arises. Were you able to signal something very strong to the Pakistanis saying, do not do this again? I don't think so. Why not? Because they were able, by and large, certainly on the first day, they were able to shoot down our aircraft.
That's
It
right.
is, it is alleged or rumored.
You in fact wrote about it. I was reading,
Yes,
although this has not been formally admitted by the government, even in the press briefing, Air Marshal A.K. Bharti said, when he was asked that question directly about the Rafale, he gave a reply which said, that losses are part of combat scenarios, and this was a
which is basic.
combat scenario.
Yes, but which is
And then
basically
diverted it that this is not the question you should be asking. You should be asking a question that what did we achieve? That is
right.
something which he said. But you wrote
Absolutely.
about it. I would like to hear from you your assessment of the Rafael, its performance, and the road ahead. You said that we have to also look at whether the fleet gets depleted or not now.
Well, look, essentially, Rafale is just a weapons platform, as most combat aircraft are.
Hmm.
But this is the first, I think this is the way that we are going to see. This is, as I've written somewhere in a book that I'm writing,
Hmm.
that I hope to complete later this year. Uh, I've said that this is warfare in the middle term future, is what we just saw the first
Okay.
illustration of, which is that combat aircraft keeping to the airspace using beyond visual range weapons to fire off aircraft in the other's airspace.
Other side.
If you bring down aircraft, it'll be in their host country's airspace. They'll never cut across your and come into your airspace. So there'll be no dogfights, none of that old Second World War hijinks of getting on the
Yes.
tail of the aircraft, enemy aircraft. So all that is over. All that is over.
Yes.
Now you had missiles, long range missiles, which the Pakistanis used brilliantly. The Chinese PL 15E
15.
missile is an excellent long range weapon, apparently, because the Pakistanis used it in combination with the IRI, the Swedish Saab AVAX,
Yes,
which was
that has
keeping
been, yes, yes.
track
Keeping
of
track of what Indian movements.
the Indian aircraft movement. And then you had the JC-10, which was their PL-15 carrier, which was in a passive mode. It is just the Saab sending the JC-10 the information, but JC-10 is remaining passive, meaning it's radar frequent. They're all inactive. It's merely taking in information but doing nothing in terms of sending out electronic signatures or anything of the
Right.
kind. So the Indian aircraft did not expect, when the PL-15 was fired, by the time they recognized that they were on the target, they had just about 50 seconds to respond. A pilot in the targeted aircraft has just about 50 seconds to respond. And that 50 seconds is not nearly enough for that pilot to do anything. And that's the reason why there's good case to be made that an Indian aircraft went down. The reason why people say it was a Rafale, very simply, is that after that first day, Rafale was grounded.
Okay.
It went out of Indian order of
Operations.
air order of battle after the first day. Why? Because the Air Force did not want to risk any more losses of Rafale, which is their big showcase aircraft, and suddenly you lose, as the Air Force tends to do. In Kargil, on the very first day, if you recall, they lost one helicopter and one MiG-21.
Right.
This is ridiculous. They don't prepare for these things. The point to make is, Indian Air Force seems to be a little backward in appreciating technology and assimilating technology into tactics, the advanced technology into the new tactics. So what happens is you are invariably surprised by what the Pakistanis do or what anybody else does. So we then are in a situation where, if this is the war you're fighting, that you're not going to violate each other's airspaces, but you're going to shoot down the enemy aircraft with long range weapons, then it means that you better have very good long range weapons. One of the reasons that the Rafale is so prized, at least on paper, is because it has something called the Meteor air-to-air missile. Meteor is a frightfully costly, frightfully expensive missile that has the widest kill zone, or most. By the kill zone, it means, if you have there's a it's a V, it's a kill cone.
So any aircraft or any other object in that part, gets targeted. Okay.
And from the nose, if you go outward, it'll be in a shape of a cone that way, and this can be as much as 65 degrees, which is an awful lot. So if once Meteor is targeted onto plane, it's a sure kill.
Showcase.
It's a sure kill. But the Pakistanis avoided that. Pakistanis avoid that because they, whatever tactics they used, they then got away from
They
any
were
kind
able
of
to get them.
counter targeting and so on. So the point is that Meteor was not integrated with any other aircraft except Rafale. See, again, the problems we create.
And after the Rafale was grounded, after the first day, we did not have the
any other aircraft with
option
that
of using the Meteor.
Meteor, the air-to-air, which is the most advanced ordnance we have in our fleet operations, that if you ground the Rafale, you ground the Meteor, unfortunately.
Okay.
While Chinese, on the other hand, the Pakistanis with the Chinese weapon systems, the PL-15 is a very inexpensive missile, comparatively, compared to the Meteors and the air-to-ground Scalp missile that we have taken from the French, or the Hammer, which is also an air to ground missile. These are very exorbitantly priced weapons. So, if your adversary can use more of the cheaper weapons he has, while we have to husband our resources because these are so costly, who do you think has the advantage?
I guess there will be a review of this, and then we will possibly, let's hope that they will possibly take the right decisions after a good review. Let me ask you a question, which a lot of people are asking us. I've been a political journalist, though that's a kind of feedback that one gets. One big question, especially by those people who have over the last decade or even maybe more decade and a half of the projection of the kind of persona that the Prime Minister Modi is, somebody who's more aggressive, somebody who does not take a terror attack lying down. He always hits back. This entire phrase of "ghar mein ghus ke marenge" being associated with Mr. Modi. The big question is that when we had, this is the exact way somebody really phrased it, somebody for whom I have high admiration, though being completely from a different field, that when we had, the option of actually squeezing out Pakistan, repeating another 1971, why agree to ceasefire?
Yeah. Well, why we'll come to a little later, if we
Yeah,
may, if we
okay.
permit it. The fact is that the opportunity we had been given by the Pakistanis themselves, incidentally, which
Right.
we did not capitalize on. What was the opportunity? In response to our holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, they announced that they are going
Shimla.
to suspend
Shimla Agreement.
Shimla
Yes.
Accord, the 1972 Shimla Accord. That gave you an opportunity because, in some sense, the LOC, the line of control, or what is honestly speaking a ceasefire line, which is what exactly how
Effectively the border.
Pervez Musharraf described it. It's a ceasefire
Yes.
line, nothing more. By the way, a ceasefire line under international law allows either party to the conflict, to the dispute,
To,
to change
to
the
alter it.
line anytime by any means they want, including military, incidentally. And you will not be violating any international law.
Mhm.
These are the characteristics of a ceasefire line. Except Shimla Accord, in a sense, formalized it, gave it a little formal recognition, which doesn't mean it's a boundary. It just means that pending a solution, this is about the thing we are going to keep to. So it has a certain formal status, which the Pakistanis revoked.
So we
Now,
had the option.
legally, we were now free to do whatever we wanted in terms of encroaching into Pakistan occupied. Encroaching is a wrong word because that suggests
That's
incremental advance.
India believes
I
that POK is part of India in any case.
That's right. We say that. And
Yeah.
we could have done something about it. And if at the very least, look, I said that what we should have done was prepare, and there was enough time to prepare, to take the Haji Pir salient.
Yes.
Why was that important? It was important in one sense, you'd have rationalized the border. By rationalizing,
It's a
meaning
very
the state
peculiar intrusion into Indian territory.
straightened out that border, south in the south of the Pir Panjal range.
Mm.
This is exactly it's kind of a finger thrusting into India, and India has Indian forces on all three
Yes,
sides.
they could have squeezed from all sides, and taken it
That's right.
over.
And all you needed to do was then close the finger, in a sense, from Uri in the north to Pooch in the south with special forces, and then you'd have destroyed the Pakistani forces inside the salient in detail. A much more doable thing.
Okay.
So this is the sort of thing we should have done. What would that have signaled to Pakistan? Because had we done that, we would, by the way, have kept the Hajipir salient. Ceasefire line is precisely as I mentioned. If you lose territory on a ceasefire line, you lose it. It's
Yes.
no
And
going
if you
back.
get it, you gain it.
Yes. However, south of Gurdaspur is the international border, where if
Yes,
you
that
gain territory, it doesn't matter
we would
because
have
at
been
the
legally, committed to return it.
that's
That
right.
was
It's restoration of the status quo ante by law. That's required by international law. So you had this opportunity. You could have done it. You didn't do it. What it
But
would
in
have
his
signaled.
Modi
No,
said, when we talk to Pakistan, we are going to talk about POK. So isn't it actually mentioning
no, no. That
something about
you can
losing an
look.
opportunity?
You look. There's no. You can talk all you want. You have talked for 70 years, right? In a sense, talk, talk,
Yes.
talk, talk, talk. Talk has no bearing on reality. Governments talk all the time. The blah 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 blah. There's millions of acres of wood destroyed with papers being produced by people talking and producing documents and whatnot. Here you have had an opportunity to actually get Haji Pir, which we had captured in 1965. One para regiment had captured the Haji Pir salient. The main is the main area from where the ISI infiltrates terrorists into Srinagar Valley. The main infiltration routes are through the salient because it juts out into the Indian territory. It's very convenient for the Pakistanis then to have these guys, out from the salient into Indian Kashmir. Now, the message that would have been sent very drastically and strongly to Islamabad would have been, and to GHQ Rawalpindi mostly, would have
Hmm.
been that if you trigger a terrorist incident in India, we are going to respond by diminishing your territory in POK, your territorial size, or will take POK bits
Right.
and pieces of territory in very critical areas from you and will not return it. So every time you have an incident,
Hmm.
we are coming across and going to grab a bit of territory. That is important. That
So,
would have
so
suddenly
that
that
that would
let me
happen.
just finish this. Let me just finish this, Nilanjan.
Hmm.
It would have immediately signaled to the Pakistan army that you risk losing POK bit by bit unless you give up terrorism, right? Because we are from here on going to respond in this way all the time. At
Mhm.
every instance of yours, we are going to respond by taking your territory, right? That would have really, put the cat amongst in the hen house. Because why? The Pakistan Army's actions or use of terrorism and asymmetric warfare is based on the certainty that they will not lose out, they'll not lose any territory, that India will respect the LOC. Now, right off the bat,
Now,
you're
if we
saying,
actually do stop, yes, I understand what you
yeah,
are trying to
that's
say.
that's the
Now,
messaging. Yeah,
yeah, messaging is very important. It would have sent the message. Now, let's try to understand from you that Operation Sindoor, what message has it sent, and how does this alter the terms of engagement between India and Pakistan, militarily and diplomatically?
let's just talk militarily first. Firstly,
Yes,
I think
sure.
what has happened is that the Indian state has, for the first time, and the Indian military has, for the first time, breached what I call a psychological barrier. Because earlier we respected the LOC as if it was virtually an international boundary. Okay, it is inviolate. Not anymore. Now we have said what the Prime Minister used to threaten, कि घर में घुस के मारेंगे. Now you have gone into
We
that
actually
घर,
done it
घुस
in
के मारा है
Punjab,
आप.
which is
जी.
not POK. We have
It's
done it
not
in Muridke and in Bhavalpur.
Bahawalpur. The madrasas and the headquarters and the base for the
Yeah, of the
Lashkar-e
two
Taiba
biggest
in
terrorist
Murid,
organizations.
right, which are now getting grouped into what they call the resistance front.
Yes.
So the fact is, now we have said we are going to target, people and institutions within the heartland of Punjab, heartland of Pakistan, or Pakistani Punjab. Because what is Pakistan other than Punjab? If you look at what's happening in Sindh or in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or in Balochistan, these three provinces have virtually no say in the running of the Pakistani state, whether it's the military, the army, or the state, the bureaucracy, the just about everything is managed by Punjabi Muslims and the Muhajirs. Now, Muhajirs are feeling left out because the Punjabi Musliman now who is dominating the entire discourse and the running of the state. So there's an awful lot of discontent within Pakistan. Now, this is something that we may capitalize on, and we could, and we perhaps we do. I don't know. The intelligence, any intelligence agency
Yes,
would jump at
definitely.
such opportunities. But you're saying diplomatically. What does diplomatically also you're signaled that we are now going to take any terrorist provocation in this manner. We're going to retaliate in this manner. If it leads to war, and next time, as the Prime Minister has hinted, it'll be stronger. He said the reaction will be stronger. And he has now announced it to the world. So it's not a secret anymore as to what the Indian reaction will be. So what Indian diplomats can now do is be far more confident in their espousal of India's case for POK, being part of India. Because 370 has got rid of that fiction of a separate, entity within the Indian Union, etc. That's over with. 35A and 370s, those things are gone. They have no constitutional protection anymore. Kashmir will be very much part of the Indian mainstream. Indians can go settle down there, open businesses there, do whatever has to be done there. And they are now, Kashmir and J&K is being linked with railways, with communications network,
But
etc.
you
in
you know,
the Indian.
can I intervene here and just ask that in the final phase of the resolution of terrorism in Kashmir, to what extent do you think it is necessary to also politically look at and try to engage with political representatives and the various sections of society in Kashmir?
No, I think it's very necessary. I think, in some sense, if you see what Chief Minister Omar Abdullah has been saying, he's been
Mhm.
offering precisely this, and even Mehbooba Mufti,
That's right.
oh yes, she has also said that we should bring in, talk to malcontents within G&K, bring them into negotiation at the negotiation table, or and talk to them. Say, hey, let's see what is it that we can do within the Indian Union. Within the Indian Union, it cannot go back to having your separate flag and this, that, and the other.
No,
No, yeah. But to how what can we do? Please tell us. So we can, if you bring them in and take their suggestions seriously, it may not be a bad thing at all, politically speaking, because there are some reports I saw where young Kashmiris are saying, please, make us part of your effort. We want to fight the Pakistanis, but make us part of your effort. So, from the political side, from the youth side, there's now a movement that we need to mobilize to say, yeah, these are people that are very much part of the essential elements of a solution, and will very gladly the Indian state will very gladly integrate these people and these other entities into
right,
the negotiation
right.
process.
So
But it's an internal process.
would you say that the response which was seen in Kashmir of the people after the Pahalgam attack, that when they responded with revulsion within the valley, and in various other parts of the region, that should not be merely a talk of government, but it should be followed up by very concrete steps to ensure that that does not become a one-off, but it becomes some kind of a recurring, I would say that response every time or any time that there is a terroristic, attack or incursion into anywhere in Jammu and Kashmir. How does one do that? For the government has to take the initiative.
Absolutely, it has to. It has to take the initiative, and it has to also ensure, as you say, we can't go back and keep, you know, in a sense, transiting the same territory, going back and forth. We should now go forward. That's why I earlier mentioned, including all these elements, even those dissident elements who want to somehow try and make it within the Indian Union. And we should incentivize every such participation. Incentivize it. How you can do it is open for negotiation. We should ask them, give us ideas. Give us ideas for the Indian government to consider. Please give us ideas. Treat them with respect. Give them every amenity for them to meet with each other, talk, discuss, have debate with each other, and come up with something. And the Indian government too should then do it for their own on their side, the Indian government and the state government, whatever, to see how these people, everybody, all sections of society can be involved and participate in the future of J&K, which also centrally should involve thinking about amalgamating POK, because that has been our policy principle, that
Yes.
all of Kashmir, including Gilgit, are India's. And so what should we do? We should ask them. We might get some very good ideas,
We
because they
still
have
have
yeah,
assembly seats reserved for the region in our Jammu and Kashmir assembly,
correct.
something which is not known by most Indians at
That's
the
right.
moment.
Right.
You talked about giving them respect, and also, I think it's also important to stop viewing the Kashmiris with suspicion. The kind of responses which were seen in some parts outside Kashmir, against the people from that region, and was uncalled for. And I think politically far greater messaging has to be done by the government. But moving on to my last question, there was some kind of an different understanding between what the Americans put out on the day of when the ceasefire was declared. It's almost appeared that India and Pakistan have agreed to talk about much wider set of issues, and that too in a neutral venue. That is what was mentioned in the US State Department handout which they put out. The Indian side has been completely silent. The Prime Minister's speech, cast some light on it. That talks, he added various conditions, that it cannot go on, talks cannot be there if terror and trade cannot be talked about, blood and water cannot flow together. So essentially, it appears that the government of India does not seem to be in too much of a hurry to get into any kind of dialogue, reviving the process with Pakistan. Is that your reading also?
Yeah, I mean, this is the usual. First of all, there are two, these are normal procedures in some sense. The Americans
Mhm.
keep trying to extend their reach into the Indian policy making turf. They try to influence it. As it is, as you may be aware, they have so penetrated our system with way back in 2016. I remember very detailing in an article published in Open magazine, where I talked about a formal fifth column. You have
Yes.
all the Washington think tanks now in Delhi, financed by Indian corporations. Even as my Center for Policy Research, for instance, is
Starved of funds.
has been minimized in lots of ways and have been targeted. I mean, it makes no sense at all that our money is upkeeping institutions in India, which purvey the American line. And this the kind of stuff. And then, of course, I've said in the staggering forward and so on, we have a situation where, say, almost 95% of the foreign service and senior IAS and so on, and major central services have their progeny in America and abroad in the West. So what does that mean? I remember asking a foreign secretary whose children are abroad, how does that affect? He said, no, it doesn't affect anything. And I said, come on, if you will do nothing, considering that
Hmm.
they may not be in the business of national security in America, but the fact is that they now reside there. They're American citizens. Would you not therefore be a little bit more in your own mind subconscious a bit more loose when it comes to dealing with America and accepting their point of view, which we invariably do because we are Western oriented anyway, because of the English language, the culture that we have, that's a legacy
Mhm.
of our colonial past. Everything, we speak English better than most Americans, honestly. I
Yes,
mean, look at Trump. Trump has such a minimum vocabulary, you're almost embarrassed, as are many Americans.
that's right.
So, what are we talking about? We have an entire fifth column, an entire section of society, very powerful section of bureaucracy, the civil services, with a stake, with a stake in America, as it were, in better relations with America, which makes them, shall we say, tilt in their official positions, I imagine, naturally would make them be a little bit more receptive to American ideas of what's good for India, right? This is how things
Right.
work, how influence networks work. And therefore, there is we see this happening. I mean, look at any of the top people who are managing our foreign policy and so on. They have
Yes.
their progeny abroad, right? I mean, so this is a fact of life that we have to deal with. It is something, and the Prime Minister himself, as my staggering forward book, which, by the way, used your book, your biography of Modi in many ways to substantiate, to profile, psychologically profile Modi. You may or may not have read that
Okay.
book of mine,
Thank you.
where a chapter wherein I said the whole notion of Modi as an alpha leader, alpha man
The
leader,
alpha
so to
male, 56
alpha,
inches
yes,
chest.
that's right. So it is a new thing. It's a very good thing. But again, and this is ironic for me in particular, because the India first, uh, you know, the entire concept of India first was first articulated by me in 2001. It is a
Right.
thing and is there. You can go look up. It was
Right.
published in the seminar. I've used it since then in all my writings and books. India first was a concept that I articulate great length. And my staggering forward book said, expressed my disappointment that in the foreign policy and the national security field, Modi had not lived up to the India First principles that I had articulated, which he had evoked in his campaign. And by the way, I'd hoped so much. I'm by instinct and by my own education, as it were. I'm an Edmund Burkean conservative. I've always
Okay.
believed that less government, the better. That government has to be
Yeah, yeah.
minimized.
And that was one of the slogans of Mr. Modi.
Absolutely. More governance, less government. What happened?
Yes.
Now he says his excuses that I can't cut off my limbs. I can shave off my nails, but cannot cut off my limbs. And if you consider the government, therefore, bureaucracy to be so instrumental and, shall we say, critical to furthering your agenda, then what does it say about India first? Because I have argued that the government is the greatest impediment to India first. Because
Well,
you
that
have
is
the control of the economy. Is when you have the private sector, which is amongst the most sophisticated in the world, a private sector industry that can outproduce anything. You have the entire socialist apparatus of the defense public sector units and the ordnance factories
yeah.
and the DRDO and whatnot, all this paraphernalia of state control. Just leave it to the private sector. They will do a better, far better job because they are at the cutting edge of producing and innovating technology, which the government has no clue about. Has no clue
Right.
about.
You know,
And if,
listening to you,
yeah,
I get tempted to, have another conversation with you, where we are going to talk about the way you analyze Mr. Modi and his policies and staggering forward, to take a look at Mr. Modi in a more holistic manner. Definitely, we will be doing it. But thank you very much, Bharat, for having, trying to shed light on this very complicated phase of history, which we are still in the process of, understanding. And I'm sure that as more and more information comes out, because we do not have all the information out in the public domain, as more and more issues come up, we will definitely be looking at it. So maybe we will speak to you again very shortly. Thank you very much for joining me on this program and spending so much of time explaining a fairly complicated matter. Thank you so
I know.
much.